IPM, Integrated Pest Management Approach. So integrated pest management means using a combination of management tools to restrict the life cycle of a pest. So number one, using a combination of management tools to restrict the life cycle of a pest. Number two, you need to identify the target and non-target species and the health and safety risks. So identify the target and non-target species and the health and safety risks. Determine what the infestation is and why it's there and how. So what the infestation is and why and how it's there. Decide what methods you need to use to control the infestation without harming non-target species or vulnerable humans. Avoid unnecessary use of pesticides. Decide what action needs to take place to stop a reinfestation. So one, using a combination of management tools to restrict the life cycle of the pests. Number two, identify the target and non-target species and the health and safety risks. Three, determine what the infestation is, how and why it's there. Decide or work out the methods you need to use to control the infestation without harming a non-target species or vulnerable humans. 5. Avoid unnecessary use of pesticides. 6. Decide what action needs to take place to stop a reinfestation. The first thing you need to do when you get onto site is do a survey so you can assess and address the issues. So do a survey to assess and address the issues. Also, there are 3 different types of visits. First visit, routine and emergency. For the first visit, you need to get as much information as possible. You need to survey the site to decide what action you need to take now and in the future. Let the customer know the job, the price, and record your findings and what you've discussed. Second, a routine visit. So sign in, introduce yourself to the customer, check the activity, so any bait stations, and make sure the customer's taking the recommended actions, for example, cleaning up rubbish, anything to stop the pests. Write your report, advise the customer what you've done, and tell the customer what they need to do, and give them the next visit date. An emergency visit. You need to listen to the customer to get all the information you can, survey the site, carry out the necessary tasks, and determine the next step you need, and let the customer know. Customer safety and your relationship with them. So when it comes to safety, you need to think of their safety when planning the work, carry out the task to put their safety first, use signage and barriers to keep them at a safe distance, advise them to keep out of the room if you're spraying, explain what you're doing, carry out treatment when there's least risk available, for example at night or after work hours if it's at a business. Keep records accurate and truthful in order to comply with the law. Your relationship, simple. Keep you and your van smart and tidy. Be polite and professional. Be understanding, because they might be scared of the pests, but you might not be. Keep them informed. Don't alarm them or worry them. Advise them what the infestation is. Give them recommendations on how they can help. Reassure them, but don't give them false hope. Legislation tells us why we need pest control, why legislation exists in pest control, the importance of it and how it works. I don't really get that. Pest controllers must. So they need to know the law, first of all. Second, survey the site before taking action. Manage pests using humane methods. Control the infestation and manage reinfestation. Keep everyone safe and record accurately. Remove waste, including carcasses. Provide a duty of care and show due diligence. Why does legislation exist in pest control? It ensures consistency and safety across the industry. It protects humans and the environment by, first of all, restricting and regulating the use of toxic substances and regulating and preventing dangerous pesticides. So it protects humans and the environment by restricting and regulating toxic substances and preventing dangerous practices. With animals, it protects them by banning cruel practices, restricting inhumane practices and techniques, controls unnecessary non-target dispatch, places a level on protection on certain birds and mammals. So animals, it protects them by banning cruel practices, restricting inhumane practices and techniques, controls unnecessary non-target dispatch, so avoids catching animals you don't need to or not aiming to, and places a level of protection on birds and mammals. Module 2, Section 1, PPE. So duties on PPE. So employees, so you, the one being employed, need to visually inspect it before you use it, wear it as you've been instructed to do so, return the PPE after use, report any damage or loss of the PPE immediately, look after your PPE and don't repair it yourself unless you've been authorised. So employees need to visually inspect it before use to make sure there's no rips or tears, wear PPE as you've been instructed to do so, so you're using it correctly, return the PPE after you've used it to a container or wherever it is kept, report damage or loss immediately, look after your PPE, don't repair it yourself unless you're authorised because you might do it incorrectly. PPE Regs 1992 says that if risk can't be avoided, then you need to use PPE. And it also says that employees can't be charged for their PPE. So a company can't charge an employee for using full PPE, and you have to use it if risk can't be avoided. Manual handling. So employees' responsibility on manual handling. They have to, 1, follow the health and safety guidance, so do it how they've been told to do it. Use the equipment properly, so don't come up with your own way of doing it. Inform or let the employer know if you notice anything dangerous. Make sure what you're doing is not putting others at risk. So the employee's responsibility on manual handling is to follow the health and safety guidance, use the equipment properly, let the employer know if there's anything dangerous, and make sure what you're doing isn't putting others at risk. So look around you and be observant. Working at Height Regulations 2005. So you need to assess the risk and then you can control the risk more. So assess and control the risk. For example, you need to use a risk assessment. You need to make sure the workers are competent. Avoid the risk if possible by using safety equipment like harnesses or cherry pickers, possibly. Check the equipment is suitable, so is this ladder the right piece of equipment to do this with? Inspect the equipment to make sure it's in good working order, so make sure the feet and the rungs aren't broken and it's not going to slip or fall. So for working at height, you need to assess and control the risk. So use a risk assessment, make sure the workers are competent. Avoid the risk if possible by using safety equipment like a harness. Check the equipment is suitable, it's the right equipment for the job. Inspect equipment to make sure that it's in good working order. Confined space assignment. You need to think about the task, first of all, second, the environment, and third, the tools and material. So if you're in a confined space, think about what you're doing, where you're doing it, and what you're doing it with. COSH, control of substance hazardous to health, COSH. So employers have to examine and test all the equipment and keep records of the examinations, tests and repairs. So they need to examine the equipment, test it, and keep records of the examinations and records of if it's tested and repaired. They need to monitor exposure in the workplace and keep records. Health surveillance, for example, having medicals or blood tests. Provide information, instruction and training to health procedures and risk. So examine and test the equipment to keep records of the examinations and tests and keep records of the repairs. Monitor exposure in the workplace. Health surveillance, so again, blood tests or medicals. Provide information, so the employees need to know information. They need to know instructions on how to do it. So what they're doing, information, instructions, how they're doing it, and then training. With manual handling, an employer's responsibility is to avoid potentially dangerous handling as much as possible, assess the risk, reduce the risk as much as possible, for example, making loads smaller or lighter. So an employer should avoid potentially dangerous handling as much as possible, assess the risk, reduce the risk as much as is reasonable, for example, making loads smaller or lighter. Employers with MHSWR, that's Management of Health and Safety at Work Regs. So MHSWR, Management of Health and Safety Work Regs. Employers need to do a risk assessment if there's reasonable risk. Put health and safety measures in place. Put a competent person in charge of this. Have emergency procedures in place. And keep health and safety surveillance records in place. So employers with the Management of Health and Safety Work Regs, MHSWR, need to do a risk assessment if there's a reasonable risk. They need to put health and safety measures in place. Put a competent person in charge of looking after things. Have emergency procedures in place in case something goes wrong. Keep health and safety surveillance records in place. So risk assessment, so what could possibly go wrong? Health and safety measures in place, so how can we reduce this risk, the risk of this? Who will we put a competent person in charge, so who can we help put in charge to oversee this? They need to be confident to make sure things are being done properly. Have an emergency procedure in place just in case something does go wrong, and keep health and safety surveillance records in place. So if someone does hurt themselves or injure themselves, there needs to be records of this kept. So with manual handling, employees have to use the equipment as they've been trained to do and report dangers and possible dangers. So employees need to use the equipment as they've been trained and report any dangers or possible dangers. So you've been trained to use a forklift. Don't mess about. Also, if you see that forklift or something else around the warehouse is dangerous, or you need to report it. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. So HASAWA, Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, says that a business has to have arrangements and safety measures in place to protect employees. So they have to have arrangements and safety measures in place to protect an employee. The main legislation is to protect humans from working conditions, for example, controlling and storing harmful substances. So just to make sure I haven't missed stuff, I'm going to go back a bit possibly as well. So employers with the management of health and safety at work regs, so MHSWR, have to do a risk assessment if there's reasonable risk and put health and safety measures in place to stop the risk or reduce it more. Put a competent person in charge, have emergency procedures in place, and keep health and safety surveillance records. I've done that. Employees need to use the equipment as they've been trained to do and report any dangers if possible. Health and safety at work regs. So management of health and safety work regs, MHSWR. You should do a risk assessment, health surveillance. You should have safety representatives that are competent, provide information on the possible dangers, and have and show the safety measures, and employees have to use the safety measures. So do a risk assessment, health surveillance, safety representatives need to be competent, provide information on the dangers, and have and show the safety measures, and employees need to use the safety measures. Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, HASAWA, Health and Safety and Work Act. This states that a business has to have arrangements and safety measures in place to protect employees. The main legislation to protect humans from working conditions, controlling and storing harmful substances. How does an employer keep the Health and Safety at Work Act? First, number one, provide and maintain safety systems, for example, clothing and equipment. Storage, number two, PPE and pesticides need to be stored correctly. Number 3, entries and exits. So employees need to provide and maintain entry and exit points so they're clear and in working order. Training, number 4. So number 4, training, information and instructions. Instruction training on how to safely use pesticides. So training. Number 4, training. They need to give information and instructions on how to use pesticides safely. 5, facilities. So welfare of employees, washing and changing facilities and toilets, etc. So number 5, facilities. So the welfare of the employee. So an employer keeps the Health and Safety at Work Act by providing and maintaining safety systems, for example, clothing and equipment. 2, storage, so storing pesticides and PPE correctly. 3, entry and exits, so making sure entry and exits are there and clear and working. 4, training. They need to give information and instructions on how to use pesticides safely. And 5, facilities, so it's about welfare, so washing, changing facilities, toilets. So it's about providing and maintaining safety equipment. 2, the storage of safety equipment and pesticides. 3, entries and exits. 4, training. 5, facilities. Risk assessments are a massive part of Health and Safety at Work Act. Generally, the health and safe working practices and rules for employees and managers are put in place by risk assessments. So the key legislation is the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations, MHSWR, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations, MHSWR, COSH, Control of Substances Hazardous to Health, Regs, 2002, Working at Height Regulations, 2005, Manual Handling Regulations, 1997. So that's Manual Handling Regulations, 1997. The Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations, 1992. So the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations, 1992. PPE Regulations, Ladder Guidance, and Confined Space Regulations. So once again, the key legislation is the Health and Safety at Work Act, 1974, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations, COSH, Working at Height Regs, Manual Handling Regs, the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regs, PPE Regs, Ladder Guidance, Confined Spaces. So Health and Safety at Work Act, so just normal health and safety. The Management of Health and Safety at Work Act, so having health and safety, how you're going to manage that. Substances, COSH. Working at heights, ladders. Manual handling regulations, lifting stuff up. Workplace health, safety, work regs. Protective equipment, PPE. Ladder guidance, confined space. So just a way to try and remember the key legislation. So Health and Safety at Work Act, obvious. You walk into the warehouse. How are they managing the health and safety at work regulations? What have they got in place? You turn and gosh, someone's got a hazardous substance. They're using a spray bottle. As you turn the other way, someone is working at height, possibly on a ladder. In front of you is someone lifting a very heavy box. Manual handling regulations. The workplace health and safety and welfare regulations. Someone to the side is wearing a hazmat suit for PPE regulations. Behind him, or he is actually on a ladder. The PPE guy is on a ladder guidance. That ladder is in a very confined space. He's trapped. Confined space regulations. Pest management. So pest controllers have to understand that health and safety and working with best practices to keep customers, public, pests, pets, colleagues, and non-target species safe. So pest management, pest controllers need to use the health and safety and work with best practices to keep customers, the public, pets, colleagues, and non-target species safe. So pest management, pest controllers need to understand that health and safety and working with best practices. So to remember it, to keep safe, you're at a customer's house, so the customer, and they live on a main road and you're spraying, but there's members of the public walking by. So customers and public, they have a dog that keeps sniffing around, so you need to keep the dog safe, so pets. You're working with someone, so you need to keep your colleague safe as well. That's Mikey. And you notice that although they've got a rat problem, they've also got rabbits as pets. And that's a non-target species. So you need to keep a non-target species safe as well. So customers, the public, pets, colleagues, and non-target species. Pest controllers work with hazards such as chemicals, firearms, height, manual handling, electrical, mechanical devices.